welcome to this industry-led panel on how to streamline MSHA audits. We'll be covering a multitude of topics, including Part 50 audits. What do you do at a Part 48 site when MSHA visits? What do you do at a Part 46 site when MSHA visits? And how digital is helping streamline most of this audit process. We'll focus a lot on those aspects during this webinar. And for this, we have two industry leading experts. One is Colin Rogers. Colin Rogers and I go back about 7 years, maybe, when he was first working at Luost. He's a certified mine safety professional, has more than 25 years worth of experience in the industry, has worked at various kinds of sites, all sorts of mine sites, and is a geek as far as I know, Colin. And the second,
that's fair.
Heavily analytical mind. And on this panel, I'd also like to invite Kenny Groves. He's also a certified mine safety professional, works with Cementation Americas at the Eagle Project. And again, I've known Kenny for maybe a couple of years now. Again, a certified geek. You give him a piece of technology, he will find various other ways to use the technology, and we can get into those sorts of stories as well. And Kenny's got more than 25 years of experience, again, in the mining industry. Okay. The way we'd like to structure this webinar is talk about how audits were done before, circa 2016, 2017, and how they've changed to using a lot of digital tools these days. Okay. And if you have questions, please, either raise your hand or type it in the chat box. Sarupya, who's assisting us, will read out those questions, and then we as a panel can address those questions. Okay. So, Kenny, why don't we start with you, Kenny? I mean, can you describe one of your MSHA audits, from maybe back in 2017 and 2018, how the process felt like back then?
Well, I luckily haven't had to go through a lot of audits, especially the Part 50 audits, because typically the Part 50 audits, from my experience, are going to come after a serious accident, or they're going to come after after a fatality, unfortunately. And at least to that end, there have been some advances with being able to track things digitally. We're able to put the information in on MSHA's website. You can pull up bulk information, or you can pull up the information from your site. You still have the burden of proof of being able to show that you're tracking all of your incidents, that you're reporting all of the reportable or recordable incidents, and making sure that everything is above board as far as the regulatory issues are concerned. So it's industry-wide and the enforcement side of the house. There have been some strides even back in 2016, 2017, as far as managing your data, right? But that was really kind of probably the transition when people stopped keeping lateral files full of folders and papers and started using, in the simplest way, using Excel spreadsheets, or just scanning things to try and digitize them, and then maybe being able to get rid of the paper folders. But it's still back then, it was still a pretty arduous process to go through an audit.
Okay. Colin, would you mind sharing some of your experiences, and also touch upon,
Sure.
What you guys used to do pre-MSHA visit, during the MSHA visit, and post-MSHA visit back in the days? Yeah.
Well, interestingly enough, one of the issues that we run into as safety professionals, we really try to be proactive, right? We try to get ahead of the curve and make sure that injuries and incidents don't happen. But we don't share that same passion when it comes to regulatory inspections for whatever reason, even though we know in the underground world, they're coming at least 4 times a year. In the surface world, they're coming at least twice. So every time they show up at the gate, it turns into this massive rush of, oh my God, what do I do now? I got to get these people ready to go. I have to get this documentation, even though you know they're going to be there and you have a list of exactly what they want, right? Ken, I'm sure you share that same issue. So how do we become more proactive and understand that, yes, they're going to be here at a minimum these times of year, because it says that directly in the Mine Act. It's literally the law. And then how do we be prepared for that and build systems that aren't individually dependent? So, but back in the day, we used to build systems that were dependent on whoever that safety person was, right? It was myself, it was Ken, or maybe one of our acolytes. But now, because the things are so revolving and we're moving around, we're doing different projects, we can't build systems that are dependent on one person or even one part of a group. And the only way to do that and make things accessible across a wider spectrum is digitization. So it can be a low cost, low tech type solution, and we're using that as well right now as we build into more advanced systems, more mature systems, file structures in a SharePoint or a Google Docs or something like that, where you can make things accessible, but you can also make things controllable. Because what we run into is MSHA is still behind the times. They have moved to digitization in their own right in a few ways using the tablets, but it's not holistically embraced. And they still want things as paper copies. And what I don't want to be able to do, because we all had the book, right? I'm sure, Ken, you have a book or had a book at one point that was all the stuff. Yeah. And you hand it to Mr. MSHA inspector or Mrs. MSHA inspector, and you say, here's all the things. Okay, well, if I want to have digital records, now I have to have redundancy and I have to have both of those. And that's just another headache we don't need. But I also don't want to sit an MSHA inspector down in front of my computer and give them carte blanche access to my entire file structure. So how do we accomplish those things? And you can do that by limiting access and control to certain files or certain file paths, having a individualized tablet for the inspector as well that has a different login, that has different credentials, that only has access to what I would call your near-term files versus your historic files. And you can give that to them in lieu of the binder. So I'm only keeping one document repository that I can open up and make available to everyone on my team, to the operations team. I can limit access. I can limit the ability for people to modify things or download things. They can view it, but they can't change it, which is another issue that we used to run into before access controls were in place. And now I can give it to MSHA as well. So by just using those type of tools, I've been able to consolidate those files and those documents, whether it's Part 50, whether it's 48 training, all the requirements found in Part 57, and I can individually disperse those at a hierarchy based on need, whether it's MSHA or internally within my own structure.
So basically, Colin, there is some sort of a role-based access control to your database, either through your own network file folder structure or through a piece of software where you have this MSHA inspector mode so that they only have access to relevant records that are required by law.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Good to know. Good to know. And I mean, when have you seen this transition happening? I mean, having worked with mines for about 10 years, we started seeing some of this transition sometime around 2018, 2019, when the new workplace exam rules came into place, where they were now allowing for digital inspection, digital workplace exams, and formulating rules around that. And that's when we felt like safety people at the mines were now more open to using digital technologies. What's your experience been in terms of adoption of these new technologies at these sites to streamline audit processes?
There are growing pains on both sides of the equation, both in industry and in the regulatory side. And they really funnel back into the same point, where people, one, are just afraid of the change, because change means that we have to do something different, learn something new, and then we fundamentally become scared of it. But also, the immaturity and the knowledge of what those systems are. I'm a card carrying member of the Nintendo generation, so I completely embrace all the fun stuff on tablets and pads and whatever else we have. But working for people who are maybe 15 years my senior or so, that was a hard sell of, hey, you know what, I'm going to get rid of this entire filing cabinet that you've had at this plant for 30 years. I'm going to put everything on this little box that sends stuff out to the cloud, and now we can access it anywhere at any time. That's scary for them, right? Because those records, the records that you physically hold in your hand, there was some comfort, there was some solace there. And now that I'm putting it in a world that they didn't quite get or had questions about, operational applicability, what happens when the power goes out, what happens if the computer blows up, all those different things. That was a hurdle that we had to overcome internally within our own company, getting approval through the IT structure, and then how are we going to implement this in the field, because there is a cost to it, right, when you start going to that level and getting devices for people and making things accessible. So it was a learning curve of how we're going to do things, and then how we're going to implement that structure over a period of time.
Okay. Kenny, how are your thoughts around that topic about when you started seeing the transition, and how easy was it to bring people along at the sites that you worked at over the years?
I think Colin pretty well nailed it right on the head, and it's a transition that's still going on, right? One of the partners that I had here was, I guess this was probably his second retirement job, and he didn't like computers, didn't want anything to do with them. While all the while I'm working on trying to digitize things, because the age of the workforce, I think there's two sides of it, right? I guess maybe three phases within the workforce right now. You've got the older generation that Colin alluded to that likes paper. They like the file cabinets. They get some comfort out of having that stuff, whatever comfort they have, knowing that they can just put it back in its file folder and put it back in that drawer, and everything is secure, and it's all good. And then you got guys that are probably Colin and I's age. I'm not going to date either one of us, but right.
You
in
already
that,
said 25 years.
right in that age range where the Nintendo kids, the Generation X guys that are maybe dabbling a little bit in the electronics as well, and then the generations that are behind us are the ones that have grown up with everything digital. They have everything right there at their fingertips, and if those are going to be the people that are going to take over and continue this industry, well, why not do what we can now and set it up so that everything is ready for them and they can make improvements as they go. It should constantly be an evolution and an improving system. Colin made an excellent point about even using SharePoint, some sort of web-based platform, right? People have gone from, myself have gone from keeping all of my records on my laptop or on a personal hard drive. That was a lesson very difficultly learned about not to do that. And then keeping it on a local network drive. And when you have problems with that local network drive, then that goes. It doesn't mean that there can't be problems and that you shouldn't inherently build in some redundancy into the system. But that being said, the cloud-based servers, if you have them available and you're able to set it up, which most of them are now, to be able to be partitioned or to be able to have some controls over who sees and can do what with the data that's in those folders, that's the way to go. Because it doesn't matter where you're at. You can sit in an airport and you can pull something up and look at it. If somebody calls you and asks you, well, what can you send me this? Maybe it's a regulatory thing, maybe it's just something from work. You can grab it right off of there and you can send it to them, or you can just simply set them up with access being able to get to it. Any number of things, but it should be constantly evolving. I think it is constantly evolving. We're still making changes here. I think me and my partner now have about 4 or 5 different little projects that we're all working on in different ways, trying to digitize more and more of what we do.
And what are your views on MSHA accepting these sorts of digital documents, especially if something's not available for whatever reason at that time, because the technology, because maybe, your site at that time just lost its network connection to the cloud, or maybe you didn't have your laptop where you were storing all of that information, or even on a network drive, right? If the network's down or if SharePoint's down at that time, what has MSHA come back with, and how have you dealt with MSHA in those kinds of circumstances?
I think as long as we make it clear, like particularly with the Part 48, when we're starting to look at training records, and we're getting to that portion of the inspection, the binders that Colin alluded to, that all of the regulatory requirements, the documentation that we have to keep, we have to provide to an inspector on their request during an inspection. If we make it clear to them that we've either transitioned or we're transitioning to an electronic system, from what I found, they've been pretty accepting of it. I'm with Colin. I don't necessarily want to sit them down at my computer and just hand them my mouse and my keyboard and say, there you go. But I will have them slide up to me. I've got the stuff that I've got electronically right now or digitally right now. I've got it partitioned off, and I can have them slide up next to me. I close everything else on my screen, and I can open the stuff up and show them everything that they want to see right there. And if they want a copy of it, I can print it out for them and I can give them a copy of it.
And Colin, how has your experience been when dealing with MSHA and showing them these digital records? And
it's been better, honestly, since I moved to Nevada. When I was in Tennessee running the operations in the Southeast, the culture was a little bit different after, especially the blending, right? So I had a number of coal inspectors coming to my sites who were even more behind the times, right? But here, because MSHA has faced a number of technical challenges with their digitization, tablet failures, battery issues, connectivity problems that I've talked to a number of inspectors about, if we have a momentary issue where we don't have direct accessibility, they've been okay with it. But the point is to build in redundancy in your system. So if you don't want to have that secondary hard copy binder to hand to them, the way we're handling it now is all of our information is embedded in Teams, which is part of SharePoint. But I keep a copy on my machine, and so does the rest of my team, that links directly to SharePoint. So anything I update in SharePoint updates physically on the machine as well. So you do have an offline accessibility to it to provide them that information. So if you'd work in those redundancies, and not to say that's completely foolproof, but if you work in those redundancies and you just have, like Kenny said, that conversation and explanation of, hey, this is where we're going, this is how we access it, and whether you do that compartmentalized individual tablet, or you could just sit down next to them. And what I like to do is up on the big conference room TV, put on one side the document, I forgot the document number, that says these are all the things that we need to look at from a regulation standpoint, going all the way from Part 45 all the way through 57 on one side of the screen, and I'll pull Teams up or SharePoint on the other side, and each one of those folders is categorized by subpart and then individually by standard. So you can pull those up directly, and if he says, okay, I want to look at the last 3 months of diesel purchases for the Part 57 air quality standards, okay, it's all right there. We'll just grab them. They're all organized by date. The hardest part outside of accessibility is making sure that we're operating within that system the same way. So things that should be simple, like where do documents go? What's your file and organizational structure? What's your naming convention? So that it doesn't turn into the digital banker's box, right? When I was a consultant, I can't tell you how many times I went into people's offices, and part of it was organization and records management and preparation for MSHA inspections. And they would literally come out with a box and say, these are all of our records. There was no organization, there was no standard, there was no classification. But you can do that digitally if the same way you can do it on paper if you don't maintain controls over that system. So you still have to administer it. It just makes it easier for that information to be accessed. So I don't know, at least up front, it takes a bit of time and effort and cognitive gymnastics to think about what the process flow is going to be. But the workload, I wouldn't say is much less. It just makes it a system that is redundant and has features that are not dependent on you as an individual, which has more value across the organization.
Right, because more people can add, more people can have access to it. Like your team, if they're split up and everybody has different responsibilities, all of those different people can make sure that
Yep.
electronic binder, that digital binder is kept up, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things to add on to what you've said, just overall in the inspection, what I've found is that having everything digitally, is, or in a binder, but in either case, I was glad that you pointed out that you can have the digital version of a box just stuffed with paper if you don't have a filing system. I have, and some people may not get this reference, but I've been accused of having a Radar O'Reilly filing system. I have stuff. It makes perfect sense to me. I know where everything is, but other people may kind of stumble around with it. But I don't necessarily do that with our documentation. But at that point of the inspection, having all of that information right there, readily available and on hand as the inspector asks for it, and they can start from the top and work their way to the bottom, it speeds that portion up. And to me, it's the equivalent of when an inspector first arrives on site, and what's the first thing they look at? Housekeeping, because it's everything that they can see without having to dig, and that's the equivalent of our housekeeping. So if everything's in order and it's right there, then we're on top of the ball and we're keeping track of this stuff that we should be keeping track of, and it makes the inspection go faster and allows everybody to move on.
So you bring up a great point. Again, is, to utilize any of these digital systems, you have to have this information architecture in place. And hopefully, if it's a multi-site, if the company has multiple sites, then how do you set up the information architecture so that everybody has the same box, right? And everybody standardized on a particular pattern. How have you guys dealt with at your companies? This whole process of information architecture, design and implementation of, where certain documents are to be, so that people can cross-pollinate across sites. And still, it feels like, yeah, I've seen this before. I know exactly where to find my documents.
Yeah, so for me, I would say thankfully now I have one mine ID to deal with, which has been kind of a blessing. But previous to that, I had 13 different mine IDs, and even previous to that, I had 9 different sites I was overseeing. So finding the gray area between commonality and standardization. What can I truly standardize between my sites, and what is common but not exactly the same? So I think more applicable when I was working for Lawson in the Southeast, I would have an underground mine, a surface dredge mine, a kaolin operation. They're bounded by Part 48, Part 56. So how do you find a common structure? So what I've found, the best thing that you can do is create up a filing system that's organized by the individual subparts. So literally you open up Title 30 and you create folders that are Part 40, 41, 44, 45. And then within those, you can add in folders specific to your mine ID. So if I opened up, say, Part 45 contractor list, within that, there are subfolders for 44 06201, whatever mine that was, and then each mine organized by mine ID -name has its own subset of folders as well. Did the same thing for Part 56 and 57. Those were broken down further into subparts. So you would have subpart G, ventilation, subpart J, travelway, and then within those you have your individual file structures for your mines. So your people could link directly to those and then drag that and drop the folders, say, from their desktop into that tree. So now I have 9 sites that are all put into one organizational structure where people can link to those folders and put the applicable documents into them. And I can manage that in one place at one point in time.
Okay. Kenny, any thoughts around that?
Yeah, I got nothing. No, I've been blessed or fortunate, I guess, with my experiences. So all of the places that I've been, it's been a single mine ID. It's been it's been relatively easy to manage, and I can't even imagine the struggle that Colin would have had to go through with those. But it sounds like he had a great organizational system put into place to be able to manage all of that information.
And
it's
Kenny,
a mountaintop.
in your world, it can be, I would say, even more difficult because from a contractor's perspective, going from one project to the next project, and the people within that organization, or as they get dispersed to new areas and new projects, that's infinitely difficult to track as well. Because it's not just MSHA, right? If you have someone from Eagle go to another project in the US, well, now they're maybe a BTAFE employee possessor for a different powder license, and those things have to move and transfer. And so, yeah, it's a similar system, but it's more fluid, or can be more fluid, where mine was fairly stagnant. But the hardest part is creating that up here first, because it's like anything else. It just doesn't exist on its own. You have to put some thought, or unfortunately, a lot of trial and error on my end, and late nights of reorganizing and moving files around because this didn't work, or it's not efficient. There are too many embedded folders. But if there's a way to put out there to these mines who are looking at this digital path and just concerned about the workload that it takes to get to that point, to help them along, this is one of those key and fairly easy things that you can set up, and you just start moving documents. You scan them, you move them, you have a standardized naming convention so they fall chronologically. It makes it a lot easier.
So you bring up a really good point, Colin, is, you introduce the concept of contractors. Now, when you have a site where you have multiple contractors also working, then, when the inspectors come out, they inspect your documents and the contractors' documents. How do you as a site ensure that the contractors also have all of their records in place? And if they are not digital, how do you migrate them to be digital and streamline those processes as well? And finally, when the contractor is not compliant for whatever reason, then who gets the citations? Of the mine, or is it the contractor and stuff? It'll be good to touch upon those topics.
So for me, it depends on who the contractor is, what their level of digital maturity is, and their systems, and what the duration of the contract is. So if I have a large embedded contract with a well-known name, then I have higher expectations about the organization of their system versus a local contractor who doesn't do a lot of work at mines, who's maybe OSHA familiar but not MSHA. Either case, regardless of who it is, there's a number of site access protocols that we go through, which are also digital, right? So they have site access system clearance that they have to get. We do inspections of all their equipment. We do an asset inventory list when they come to site, so we know what they're bringing on and what they're departing with. All of those get uploaded into a contractor management folder. We use applications for that as well. So some other apps like iAuditor and whatnot to track that information. And then we do verification of what type of training. And that's probably one of the harder things for us to do, because we have effectively two different styles, right? You have hazard training, you have experienced miner training, and that depends on the duration of the contract and the type of exposure. But it's really fluid in MSHA's definition. There's no real, this is the type of training specifically that this person needs. So we have to do a lot of that manually and sorting and saying, okay, well, this person, because of what they're doing and how long they're going to be here, they need this type versus that type. Once we sort that out, the contractor will do the training. If they have a training plan, if not, they'll add under ours, and their certified trainer will go through it, and we will do periodic evaluations. So I'll go over to the contractor's trailer, and we have one on site now, and say, hey, I need to see 5 training records from the people who are on site today. These are their names. I just pulled them out of the Access database when they badged in. Let me take a look at them. And I look at their annual refresher, I look at their experience minor, I look at all their task training, and then I take their task training out into the field and I verify that they're using those pieces of equipment, they're going by their competency checklists, all of the things that are in the folder.
Okay. And I mean, does a system like Groundhog help if the contractor is also using these sorts of tools like Groundhog or any other safety training management system?
It does, especially if it is a Groundhog type system that doesn't require direct connectivity, right? Because the moment I step outside of the office, especially where I have now, my cell service goes to 0. So if I have a system, or they're using a system like a SharePoint that I can't get out in the field, you still have to look at all that information while you're in the building, or print it out and take it with you, versus having everything on the old iOS device. Yeah.
Okay. And Kenny, from a contractor's perspective, right? I mean, although you have digitized all of these, your side of the safety ops, what's your client's view of your digitization process? And, how are you, how does a client view you now that you are largely digital?
Well, from what I understand, they're very intrigued with it, and I've spoken to them directly about Groundhog. Showed them what we can do with it, what we're doing with it currently, and I know that they had expressed some interest with it. And I thought at one time they had gotten a hold of you, but we're frequently rolling out new things. Like just the other day, we've gotten to the point now where the QR codes that we have available for the employees. Yep. So the guys are able now to, we've gotten those out to everybody. Unfortunately, I think I've gotten the nickname QR Kenny now, because we've got QR codes everywhere. So but the nice thing about it is that we're seeing a lot of buy-in and a lot of interest from the guys, because now, typically on a site, it's not like the guys couldn't see their training records if they wanted to, but that meant they had to go to somebody's office to get them. As we've moved into the digital side of it, and we now have a way that everybody can access it, and it's limited access. They can see their material, or if they want to, they could scan somebody else's QR code and they can see what that person has. But they can scan theirs and they can see exactly what they're signed off on. More to the point, if the shifter needs to reassign somebody because a haul truck breaks down, or a loader breaks down, or any piece of equipment breaks down, and as a contractor, we want to keep our guys busy, and as a mine operator, you want to keep the folks busy. So if there's something else that we can have them do, that gives the shifter the opportunity right there to make sure that the individual that they're going to retask has the appropriate training on either the task or the equipment, rather than just saying, okay, go do this. And maybe the guy knows, maybe the guy doesn't know, whatever it is, but we could potentially be putting somebody into harm's way by telling them to go run a piece of equipment or perform a task that they're not familiar with or haven't been trained on. And that gives us the ability to be proactive and make sure that we're assigning them people appropriately.
Got it.
Yeah, and I agree, Ken. One of the ways that we can increase digitization in our world in health and safety is by, coalescing what our needs with operations, right? Because we can justify cost savings and time savings based on operational impacts, I think, more so than health and safety, because we're in the business of prevention. It's harder to quantify those things. So you're right. If I can have a system like a training database, where if I'm a shifter, and we all know that we walk into line out in the morning and it's going to go perfect, right? Nobody's going to dump a shift. Nothing's going to break down. We're not going to call an audible halfway through, right? But when those things happen, I need a device or the ability at my fingertips to be able to know who can do what. who's signed off on what jobs and what tasks, and who can I have do what and move people around. Because, miners by nature, if I'm assigning you a work task and I say, Kenny, I need you to go run this bolter, and you might not be signed off on it, but what are you going to say? No, because you want to go get the job done, right? There's a desire in there to go make it happen. So instead of asking somebody to go do something with the hope or belief that they're signed off, that they're comprehensively trained, we can look and we can move those people around in the system. That's been, I think, a big benefit. And the more that we get into that and incorporate those type of things with our world, the more successful we're going to be long term. Because we can't have products, I think, that are just for health and safety. Even though they might add significant value, it has to look at the entirety of the package, right? If you picture mining operations, and this is the analogy I like to use, it's like the old fire triangle. But on our triangle, we have our ESG, we have our people on our planet on one side, we have operational efficiency and cost efficiency on one side, and we have product quality and optimization on the other side. And if you lose either one of those, you're not an efficient or productive or quality operation. So if we can find ways to implement systems that feed all three of those, then we're always going to be money ahead.
Awesome.
I agree 100%. I think the other thing that we've seen since we started making these available is that the guys now have engagement with what they're trained on. So if they think that they've been trained on something, and we're still in that process of moving things over. So it's a combination of the old paper training packets and the 5023s. We're getting there, but it's not going to be an overnight thing. But the guys are like, well, no, I was trained on that. Okay, well, I'm sorry, I don't have any documentation. I don't have any doubt that maybe you were trained on it, but I don't have anything that says you were trained on it. And then if they go back and they look through their pie can, or they look through their digger pockets, or they look in their locker or something like that, lo and behold, here's a training packet that was all crumpled up that was completed, was signed off and all that stuff. And they just hadn't turned it in because they were thinking about going home at the end of the shift. So now they're getting a little bit of buy-in. They're curious about what they're signed off on. And the other aspect of it, at least for the miners, for the operations part of it, for the companies that use a progression path to promote miners and move them up, if they use tech levels, like miner 3, miner 2, miner 1, having the availability here electronically to be able to keep track and see where you're signed off, and maybe I need to be signed off on the last piece of gear I need to be signed off on to be able to get my pay upgrade and get an upgrade in my bonus is a jumbo. And while I've got all the rest of this stuff, but oh man, I need a jumbo. So if I've got some spare time, spare being a relative term, but if I've got the time, I finished up with some of my other tasks, I can ask my shifter, hey, can I go jump on a jumbo that's still drilling and spend a little bit of time with the operator and get some training in there and have some documentation for it? Yeah, absolutely. So then that gives the guys the buy-in into their own system instead of just and being able to be proactive for themselves rather than waiting for somebody to say, hey, I think we're ready to give you a raise.
Absolutely. We're seeing the same thing as we start to implement those into our structure as well. So it's not just the shifter being able to look at who has what, but the guy, he gets that email notification that says, you're going to expire on these certificates in the next 30 days. And he looks at his hitch rotation schedule, says, okay, well, I need to get these done, or I'm going to drop from top miner tech 5 down to a tech 4. And this is what is going to happen to my pay. Right. So it puts a lot of that into their wheelhouse. We don't have to monitor it as strictly anymore because we're getting those updates automatically, but we actually have people coming to us and saying, I need this to happen. Right. So we can work that into a schedule. Right. Again, being proactive.
Which to me is that goes back to that proactive side of it, Colin, like you said, because then the guys are coming to us. And guys and girls, but they're coming to us and saying, look, I need this because I need to be signed off on it, or they're getting with their shifter to arrange their own time, and they're being proactive, which is way more effective than having the safety guy say, hey, come here, you need to get signed off on this, or you need to do a refresher on this.
Yeah, chasing people down wastes so much of our time. It
Holy
really
cow.
does.
Yeah.
And now that we can look ahead, we can look into the future and say, okay, Ken, on your next rotation, you need to do your recertification, your competency verification on a jumbo, on a 1600, and on an 8030 to maintain your tech levels. Okay, then we'll schedule that in, and we can look at that schedule based on the production schedule and the line out schedule, and we can move those pieces around and effectively drag and drop when that needs to happen, and make health, safety, and training part of the daily line out, part of the daily operational plan. So we're not affecting it, but we're also having our say in what we need to get done in our department.
Yeah, I think it
What I'm
marries the
hearing you
two up.
guys, go ahead, Kenny.
Oh, I was just agreeing with Colin. It marries up the safety and the operations and the maintenance side, because that's a often overlooked area within mining. We have a tendency to focus on operations, and I guess it depends on how you want to term it. But the maintenance departments, the electrical departments, unfortunately, in a lot of mining operations, are overlooked when it comes to trainings and certifications. And that's something that we're really striving here to make sure that we're incorporating, to make it an all-inclusive group, so that our electricians have tasks that they have to do that they need training for. Our maintenance guys have tasks that they do that they need training for. And that gives us the opportunity to be able to track it and use the same platform that we're tracking our operations group with.
So what I'm hearing, what I've heard in this conversation over the past few minutes is, number one, going digital has streamlined the MSHA inspection process itself, has helped you guys lower your overall burden with MSHA. That's number one. Number two, and this is even more important, is you guys are changing the culture, the safety culture, and the progression planning and skill upliftment culture from more of a push down to a more proactive training sort of culture, with digital as an enabler for that, right? So that as a whole, the workforce is upskilled, and then they are involved in their own upliftment from a job progression planning standpoint. And I wonder if this impacts the overall number of incidents that happen at mines, and what the impact is to citations and those kinds of things. I know Colin has done a lot of analytics around citations and things like that. So is digital helping reduce overall citations? And your thoughts around that, both Colin and Kenny?
I think it is, right? So if from the training side, if I am doing competency verifications and I'm keeping track of things better, and I make it easier to determine who's on what training path, and make sure people are redoing that training, the quality of that person's operation, whether it's a piece of equipment or an assigned task, it is going to be higher, right? So the more training that we can do and then verify, then that person is supposedly going to operate that equipment or perform that task safely. It still comes down to individual choices, right? And a lot of supervisor and management influence, but the building blocks, the foundations for success are more prevalent, and they're easier to produce. And the same thing with the MSHA side, the analytics side. We were very reactive before, we as an industry, even though, again, going back to, we know these people are coming to our site, we know what they're going to do. Everybody, I think, in this profession has done some kind of audit, or has an audit system, whether it's planned general inspections or site hazard inspections. But typically those take the form of, you go out into the field, either as an individual or as a group, you take some pictures, you have some conversations, you come back, and maybe there's an email, maybe you put a PowerPoint together with some pictures and assign some corrective actions. But again, being the data nerd of the group, we don't do anything with the information that we collect to do predictive failure analysis, right? So if we take that information and we assign it the same categories and validity as we did with, if I was an MSHA inspector, then I can look at things like, what's my negligence impact? What is my gravity impact? What is my overall financial impact? And this is what I used to do as a consultant to justify my own existence, was if I find this many violations during an 8-hour period and that predicted dollar number is higher than my totalized rate, then you're doing well as a company, right? Because now you hired me as a consultant, I'm a deductible business cost versus having all these violations. But it also lets us look at things individually instead of the shotgun approach, because we, in health and safety, we like to say, it's all broken, we're just going to fix it all. Right? That doesn't work, because like making a peanut butter sandwich, we just get spread too thin over the bread and we're just not effective. So if I have those background analytics through my auditing process, I can say, you know what, across these 9 different sites, I did all of these audits and I've come back with, these are my top either subparts, maybe it's subpart J, travel ways, maybe even down to the individual standards at 56, 57, 11001, safe access. I'm going to put together a training packet that I can spam across my entire region that now is specific to travel ways, walking and working surfaces, and safe access during jobs, that I don't have to just pick a safety topic of the week out of a hat. It can be directly applicable to the things I'm seeing in the field. And as I went through this process over a period of about 5 years, we saw a reversal in the number of findings and the number of MSHA violations. So violations were higher than findings. They reversed, and then they kind of stagnated back towards each other as we found all the low-hanging fruit and conditional things. But I hate to quote a number, but it was something in the order of an 80% overall reduction in issued violations, sustained reduction, and a 90-something% reduction in overall issued penalties. So the severity of those things went down as well, because we were going through this campaign of individualizing training and topics and focus areas based on digital analytics.
That's just amazing, Colin. That's just amazing. Any insights? I know you had a MSHA inspection recently as well, and can you describe that experience with using, or at least showing a lot of these the data through cloud-based software and things like that?
Well, yeah, I mean, when it got to doing the training records, the inspector, I don't think, had seen anything like what we're using now, and he found it pretty impressive to be able to see, like if I wanted to, he could just go through and pick out a person, and I could show them, yep, they're signed off on all this stuff. You can either look it up by the individual, or you can look it up by the piece of equipment and get a list of the folks who are signed off on a piece of equipment. So much as Colin and I'm sure myself do, if you're out in the field and you see somebody operating a piece of equipment, before this, you'd jot down some notes, talk to the guys and all that stuff, and come back. And if you were trying to be diligent, you'd start going through folders and see if you could find the training for them and all that stuff, and make sure that everything was good. Now you can stand back there and, well, there goes Bob on a forklift. Huh. I haven't seen Bob operate a forklift for about 1.5 years now. You can bring it up. You can bring it up on your phone or your tablet. Oh, hey, Bob, stop what you're doing. We need to have a chat. If that's the case. So the inspectors that I was showing that to were pretty impressed. And I love Colin's take on the being proactive and getting out ahead of it. Getting out in the field, and when we see things that we notice that are recurring, and then bringing them up, hopefully it does 2 things, at least from my point of view. One, it describes the expectations for the workforce that, we can't do this, and here's why. The other side of it is, especially if we incorporate the MSHA standards, whatever that standard is, that's some education for the workforce as well. Because the unfortunate reality of it is, even though we talk about MSHA standards and we discuss them before, during, and after MSHA inspections, and we talk about it during annual refresher training, even if we give our guys the little green books, they're not going to pack them around with them and look at the standards. We're given the rules to follow. But that's an opportunity for us in safety and health to act as educators as well, which is really kind of the crux of what we're doing. And having having everything digitized just makes it just that much easier. Because I've gotten to the point now where I've had the same little book for, I don't know, probably 15 years. And now I very rarely pack that around because I've got it on my electronic device. So I can scroll through and I can look at it. Nope, that's a standard that we need to work on. And yep, we're seeing some recurring issues. So
yeah, I was going to say, Ken, that digitization is happening everywhere, right? It's right there on the tablet with all three books. It's all in the field. It's at your fingertips. Program policy manual, everything is incorporated in it.
Yep, absolutely.
Now, what are your thoughts? I mean, I know we have a few more minutes and maybe we just open it up for questions as well. What are your thoughts on, moving forward? What are other aspects of those MSHA inspections that we can streamline further? Both from an organizational standpoint, organization as an internal processes, which have to do with, pre-MSHA visits, during MSHA visits, and post-MSHA visits. Because one of the things that you had touched upon earlier, Colin, was, based on the findings, how do we incorporate or change standard operating procedures to improve overall safety, right?
Sure.
With increased digitization, how do you guys foresee?
So you're right. I look at that in three parts. What can I do beforehand to prepare? How do I react when they're on site? And then how do I manage if I'm issued violations through the process? So we went over, I think, the first part, the proactivity part. When they're on site, again, using a fairly low cost, low tech, we do all of our or inspection documentation using a shared team OneNote. So you create a new note section for every event number, and then each person who is participating in the inspection has a page that they create. All of their handwritten notes, all their pictures, all their information is there. And then there's a cover page that goes to it that has all the places that they visited, what violations were issued, if any, to what divisions. All the information is there and then sent out as a link to the site leadership team. So every day you get an update of the inspection of the party, who said what, when, and where, and what happened. That's been a big one as well. But one of the more difficult areas, and not so much, I would say now, again, having one mine ID, but when I had multiple mine IDs before, is tracking violations after they're issued, learning from them, and also moving through the process. So once you go through the closeout conference, do you informally conference? Do you contest? And then when I have the results of those, what information can I use? So I think, like most of us, I created an Excel database and I track all that in there. It's very time consuming because you have to input everything manually, but I use it as predictive for the next visit. So let's say I have Inspector Joe come out and he issues a number of violations, and I have him come to multiple sites. Over a period of time, I can develop a trend. So I can pull a report right now that says AR 5063 issued 32 violations across 12 different sites. And of those 32 violations, 70% of them were in this subpart, and they were representative of these three top standards. So now, knowing that information, knowing that this fella likes to look for these particular things, maybe he's a whip check guy or a fire extinguisher guy or the banana peel in the trash can guy, I can proactively print out sheets for each one of my safety professionals that have the inspector's name and AR number at the top, their statistics, what they've issued, where they've issued it, and then for the particular standards, maybe it's the top 5, I can bullet point mitigations that my team can use in the field to start those conversations to either get things thrown out before they're written, or at least modified to maybe a moderate negligence or a low negligence or something like that in the field. So we don't even have to go through that time consuming process on the back end. And we do that through analytics and being proactive.
Yeah. Cool.
I think that's an excellent way of doing it, Colin. I haven't gotten to that point of tracking everything, but we in our area we do have a new inspector that's up here, and we actually did to a smaller degree do that because we were noticing an increase in citations because we had different perspectives, and we noticed an increase in citations at our clients' other property, same mine ID, just a different facility, but things that hadn't historically been cited throughout the history of the mine inspections. And we noticed that this one inspector was 60 to 70% of the citations in half of the inspection days. Yeah. So he was picking on some very particular things. Every inspector has their own little peccadillos that they go after and really stand out to them, and it's very important that we learn from those, because we should constantly be learning about what they're going to be looking for as well, for a couple of reasons.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, from a regulatory standpoint, as well as for also just making sure that everything is safer going forward as well, right? So
absolutely.
Okay. I know we are about time. I mean, typically we take questions, but given the paucity of time, maybe we can, let me see whether there's any other questions that came up. Well, maybe we have a very engineering specific crowd where they don't like answering or asking questions, or maybe you just covered everything that was to know about things.
We'll go with the second answer.
Very, very insightful discussion. Thank you, Colin, and thank you, Kenny. Any closing thoughts on how you foresee safety evolving at mines, safety practices and safety technology evolving at mines over these next 2 to 5 years?
I think, from a very basic viewpoint, I think they're going to go hand in hand. I really think with the way that the equipment is evolving, the changes that the manufacturers are making, that by default is making the mining environment itself digital to a point. Now we have the advent of Groundhog and other operational software. So everything is meshing together, and the only thing that I can see from it, aside from the initial growing pains, once it gets up and running and people start seeing what it can do, they realize the change is not that hard, and they are going to see some benefits from it in the long run. They just got to stick with it, and we have to do our part to get them engaged.
Right. I don't know.
Yeah, no, and absolutely. I think we don't have a choice at this point but to embrace technological advancement. This isn't going to be the days of binders and handshakes and the old way that it used to be. Even when I started, right, things have changed significantly. And part of it is individual burden. It's the things that we've decided to do as companies. We've taken on a number of other challenges that just weren't prevalent, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. We're doing things like ISO 45001. We're doing things like core safety, where our administrative burden is significantly more than it used to be. And we haven't matched the level of staffing that we need, or can even find the level of staffing in this profession to meet both the administrative burden and our responsibilities to be proactive and have interactions in the field. In a perfect world for my team, I like to have them be 70% in the field, 30% in the office. Those numbers are shifting because of the administrative burden, and it's the regulatory stuff whether you have just MSHA or you have state mining authorities, it's internal requirements that we're putting on ourselves as owners and agents of the operator. The only way to achieve success and make those numbers shift back is to either one, increase our headcount, which probably isn't going to happen, right? Because that's a significant cost burden. And I think the availability, like everybody else in this industry right now, the resource, the human capital just isn't there. I know I'm struggling to find people competent, especially in the underground side, health and safety folks. So the only other option that we have is to use the resources at our hand and find ways to eliminate the burdens, right? So how do we eliminate the operational burdens of data management, data filing, and the administrative stuff that we have to go through? Digitization is the only path.
Colin.
It really is.
Oh, is that me?
Colin, I think you hit it right on the head.
You there, Satish? You okay? Oh, maybe just you and me now, bud.
Yeah,
Yeah, lost
looks
my
like you.
audio for a couple of minutes.
There you go. There you go. No, Colin, I couldn't agree more. I think you hit it right on the head. That it's the direction we're going, and I agree completely. We really don't have a choice. We can either fight it or we can embrace it. And we might as well just go along with it and lead the way.
If you've ever worked in Australia or for Australians, they have a wonderful saying, FIFO. That applies.
Awesome. Just wanted to thank both Colin and Kenny and all the attendees for making this an amazing webinar. Thank you for all the insights, guys. I'll also say this is that our next webinar is a month from now, and it's primarily going to tie digitization to how a mine can achieve its ESG goals. We'll publish that via email, via our newsletter, and on our website, and more importantly on LinkedIn. Please sign up and attend that webinar as well. With that, again, thank you all for attending, and special thanks to you, Colin, and to Kenny for all of your valuable insights and in making this a more safe environment for all of us miners to work in. Yeah,
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Thanks.
I appreciate it. And I want to throw out there, I appreciate the work that you guys do to give us the tools that we need to succeed. As without people, because I don't know what it takes to develop an application. I just give you these pie in the sky ideas of, hey, this would be great. But without folks who are actually giving us those tools and those applications, and the abilities, we just wouldn't be able to do what we need to do.
fair enough. And thank you guys so
100%.
much.
Yep.
Amazing people, guys, amazing safety people, and even better friends. So please get in touch with them if you have any questions on safety. Yeah. All right. Thank you.
All right. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks. Make it a safe shift.
Bye.